Assalamu alaikum everyone, Abiha Chaudhary here. Today I'm going to talk about the purification of water on a large scale. This presentation has been compiled by myself, Farah, and Murtaza, and with that we'll get started. So the purification of water can take place on a small scale and a large scale. Today we're going to solely focus on the large scale. The purpose of doing this is to provide safe water to a large population, and the actual method that we follow to purify the water would depend on the source of raw water as well as the desired water quality. So for example, if you have groundwater, it would require less purification in comparison to, say, surface water. But when we talk about purification altogether, there are three basic measures that are taken, and that is storage, filtration, and disinfection. And our entire presentation is going to revolve around these 3 points. So the first step to purify water is to store it. And in this, what we do is that the water is drawn out from its natural stores and it is kept in a natural or artificial reservoir from which further pollution will be excluded. And the interesting thing is that even storing the water allows a process of natural purification to take place. And this occurs from 3 points of view. The first one being physical purification, in which 90% of the suspended impurities settle down in 24 hours by the action of gravity, which would allow the penetration of light and it would reduce the work of filters later on. So the physical purification process takes place thanks to the help of gravity. Then we have chemical purification, in which aerobic bacteria oxidize the organic matter that is present in the water in the presence of oxygen, and this would result in the decrease of free ammonia and the rise in the nitrates of the water. And finally, we have the process of biological purification. In this, the bacterial load decreases by almost 90% in the first 5 to 7 days. This is because the pathogenic organisms are going to gradually die out. So what would be the optimum amount of time that we should store water? Well, it's about 10 to 14 days, because after that, the algae starts to grow and this would impart a bad smell and color to the water. Here is an example of what a storage site looks like. With this, we'll move on to the next step in the purification process, which is filtration. So the second step is filtration. In this, 98 to 99% of the bacteria are removed by filtration apart from other impurities. And we have two types of filter. One is the slow sand or biological filter, and the second one is the rapid sand or mechanical filter. So a slow sand or biological filter is the standard method of water purification. By its name, you can see that it says slow sand. What we mean by that is that water is going to be filtered slowly by percolating or seeping through sand. And it has a biological component to the purification process, which we'll talk about later. It has 4 elements. These are supernatant water, a bed of graded sand, under drainage system, and a system of filter control valves. This would be better explained. So you can see at the top, the raw water is coming in through the inlet, and that slightly dotted area that you see, that's the supernatant water. The reason why it's called supernatant water is because the process of natronization already took place when we stored the water. So naturally, this would be the supernatant water. Right underneath that, you see the filter bed. That is the sand bed. That is supported by gravel. That also is a part of the sand bed. On the right, you can see the control valve, and that is also the under drainage system, which we can't see right now because the gravel actually covers the under drainage system. All right, let's go over them one by one. The first part of the slow sand filter is the supernatant water. This is 1 to 1.5 meters in depth, and its level is going to be kept constant. The reason being that it provides 2 important purposes. First, it provides a constant head of water so as to overcome the resistance of the filter bed. This is because the weight of the water is going to allow the filtration process to occur. And secondly, it provides a waiting period of 3 to 12 hours within which the raw water will once again undergo partial purification by sedimentation, oxidation, and partial agglomeration. You can see the supernatant water that's blue within this diagram. Next, we have the sand bed. This is the most important part of the slow sand filter. It has a thickness of about 1 meter, and we have sand grains that are rounded and have a diameter of about 0.2 to 0.3 millimeters. This sand grain has to be completely pure. It doesn't have any free organic matter that could cause the entire filtration process to become impure. And this sand bed is supported by a layer of graded gravel that is 30 to 40 centimeters deep. This will prevent the fine grains of sand from being carried into the drainage pipes as the water flows through. 1 cubic meter of the filter sand presents about 15,000 square meters of surface area. The water percolates through the sand bed within 2 hours or more and passes through a number of purification processes, which are 5 in number: mechanical straining, sedimentation, absorption, oxidation, and bacterial action. The design rate of filtration of the water normally lies between 0.1 and 0.4 meter cube per hour per square meter of the sand bed surface. Just remember the 0.1 to 0.4 number and notice how it's quite small, which comes to show that this is a slow filtration process. Now, if we bed, the sand particles are of different sizes. They're finer at the top and they're coarser at the bottom. And beneath the sand, there's gravel, which is again finer at the top, coarser at the bottom. And the coarse gravel actually contains the under drainage pipes that we'll talk about later. Now, so far, we've spoken about like the mechanical process of filtering, but slow sand filter is also known as a biological filter. The reason is because it consists of a layer that actually carries out the biological. The layer of the sand bed that carries out the biological process is actually known as the vital layer. What happens is that when the filter is newly laid, it acts merely as a mechanical strainer and cannot be truly considered as biological. But what happens is that very soon the surface of the sand bed gets covered with a slimy growth that's known as Schmutzdeck, the vital layer, the zugloyal layer, or the biological layer. Schmutzdeck is just German for dirty skin, so you can remember it like that. This layer is slimy and gelatinous, and it consists of thread-like algae and numerous forms of life, including plankton, diatom, and bacteria. The formation of this vital layer is known as ripening of the filter. It doesn't occur just suddenly as soon as we put the sand in. It actually takes several days for the vital layer to form fully. And when it is fully formed, it extends for 2 to 3 centimeters from the top portion of the sand bed. So you can see in the diagram below that the top 2 to 3 centimeters of the filter bed is actually the Schmutzdeck. This vital layer is the heart of the slow sand filter because what it does, it removes the organic matter, it holds back bacteria, and it oxidizes the ammonium compounds into nitrates, which helps in yielding free water. And until the vital layer isn't fully formed, the first few days of filtrate is usually run to waste. This means that when we actually set up the new filter for the first time, we're actually going to not use the water that is like filtered out for the first, say, 3-4 days. The reason being that the vital layer hasn't completely formed yet. So it just comes to show how vital this vital layer is. Next, we have the under drainage system. The bottom part of where you saw the gravel, it actually consists of porous or perforated pipes, and this serves the dual purpose of both providing an outlet for the filtered water as well as supporting the filter medium above. Now, we've talked about the supernatant water, we've talked about the sand bed, and now we're talking about the under drainage system. All these three things, the first three elements of the slow sand filter, is known as the filter box. This is usually rectangular in shape. It is about from 2.5 to 4 meters deep, and it is wholly or partially under the ground. The walls can be made of stone, brick, or cement. And if we look at it from top to bottom, we have the supernatant water, which is 1 to 1.5 meters in depth. We have the sand bed, which is 1.2 meters. The gravel bottom, which is a portion of the sand bed, is 0.3 meters. And the one that we're talking about right now is the filter bottom, which is 0.16 meters. Finally, we come on to the filter control. The filter is equipped with certain valves and devices which are incorporated in the outlet pipe system. The purpose of the filter control is to maintain a constant rate of filtration. And an important component of the regulation system is something known as the Venturi meter. This measures the bed resistance or loss of head. Basically, what loss of head really means is like how much of the sand bed has now been covered up with impurities or microorganisms and is now no longer effective. So basically it's just the resistance. And when the resistance builds up, the operator opens the regulating valve so as to maintain a steady rate of filtration. Of course, we were going to have to open the valve more to allow more filtration to occur to provide less resistance. And when the loss of head exceeds 1.3 meters, it is uneconomical to run the filter. What do we do then? We actually are going to wash the filter. This is known as filter cleaning. When the bed resistance increases to such an extent that the regulating valve has to be kept fully open, then it is time to clean the filter bed, because any further increase in the resistance is actually bound to decrease the filtration rate. So the supernatant water is going to be turned off. The sand bed is cleaned and scraped off the top portion of the sand layer to a depth of about 1 to 2 centimeters. Notice how only the first 1 to 2 centimeters of the sand bed is going to be scraped off, and the reason is this is the schmutz deck. We're going to only get rid of the schmutz deck. This operation can be carried out with unskilled laborers using very simple tools, and after 20 to 30 scrapings, the thickness of the sand bed will have reduced to about 0.5 to 0.8 meters. This is the time when the plant is closed down and a new bed has to be constructed. So what are the advantages of a slow sand filter? Well, it's simple to construct and operate. The cost of construction is cheaper. Its physical, chemical, and bacteriological quality of filtered water is quite high. However, there are certain limitations. A large surface area and quantity of filter media is required. They are labor intensive for cleaning. A high turbidity level can clog the fine media sand. And in waters with very low nutrient concentrations, the turbidity removal actually may be impaired by the slow growth of microorganism in the schmutz deck. This is all in comparison to the next filter we're going to be talking about, which is the next filter that we're going to talk about is the rapid sand or mechanical filter. There are two types, the gravity type example Patterson's filter and the pressure type example Candy's filter. And we're going to talk about the 5 main steps that rapid sand encompasses, and this is coagulation, rapid mixing, flocculation, sedimentation, filtration. We're going to go over each of these one by one. Here is an image of what a rapid sand filter looks like. The differentiating feature between the rapid sand filter and the slow sand filter is the wash troughs. The wash troughs are those pipes that you can see at the top of the rapid sand filter. You won't see those when it comes to the slow sand filters, and they play an important role in backwashing. So the first step in rapid sand filtration is the process of coagulation. Raw water is first treated with a chemical coagulant such as alum, and the amount is actually depends on the turbidity, color, temperature, and pH of water, but it's around 5 to 40 milligrams or more per liter. Next step is rapid mixing. We need to allow the rapid dissemination of alum throughout the bulk of the water by violent agitation of the treated water in a mixing chamber for just a few minutes. Next, we're going to have the process of flocculation. In this phase, there is slow and gentle stirring of treated water in a flocculation chamber. This is going to result in the formation of thick, copious, white flocculant precipitate of aluminum hydroxide. This is quite heavy, and this is going to undergo the next process of sedimentation, in which the treated water is led into the sedimentation tanks for 2 to 6 hours. Here, the flocculant precipitate, together with the impurities and the bacteria, settles down, and it is removed from time to time. It's important that we get rid of at least 95% of the flocculant precipitate before the water is admitted into the filters, which is the last process, filtration. This is where the partly clarified water will be subjected to rapid sand filters. We're going to talk about this in more detail. Like when we talked about the sand beds in the slow sand filter, the rapid sand filter has filter beds. The surface area is 80 to 90 square meters. The filtering medium is also sand. The sand particle size is a bit larger, 0.4 to 0.7 millimeters. Depth is also 1 meter. It also contains graded gravel. The depth of the water is the same. It's 1 to 1.5 meters. And the difference that you have to note here is that the rate of filtration is 5 to 15 cubic meter per meter square per hour of water, which is faster than the slow sand filter, thus giving its name the rapid sand filter. The filtration process proceeds, and what happens is that the alum floc that was not removed by sedimentation is held back on the sand bed. This is going to form a slimy layer. This slimy layer is going to absorb bacteria from the water, and this would affect the purification process. The oxidation of ammonia also takes place during the passage of water through the filters. As filtration proceeds, the suspended impurities will clog the filter. The clogging of the filter in the rapid sand takes place much more often, and for this we're going to need of backwashing. This is where the rapid sand filter requires frequent washing daily or weekly depending on the loss of head. Here it's 7 to 8 feet. The washing is accompanied by the reversing of the flow of water through the sand, and that's why it's known as backwashing. It dislodges the impurities and cleans up the sand bed. The washing is stopped when the clear sand is visible almost after 15 minutes from the start of the process. In some filters, we also use compressed air as a part of the backwashing process. This would be better explained by the use of a diagram. Right here, you can see that on the left is the filtration process where the water comes from top to bottom, and the backwash process, the water moves from bottom to top. The advantages of the rapid sand filter are that it deals with the raw water directly, so we don't need to store the water. It occupies less space. It is much more rapid, about 40 to 50 times more rapid than slow sand filter. It has easy washing, and it is more flexible in operation. Let's compare the two. Basically, the area of the rapid sand filter is smaller in comparison to the slow sand filter. The rate of filtration is much more higher in rapid sand filter than it is in the slow sand filter. The sand size diameter is more in the rapid sand, smaller in the slow sand filter. In pre-treatment, we require coagulation and sedimentation in the rapid sand filter, but only sedimentation in the slow sand filter. In the filter cleaning process, we do backwashing for the rapid sand filter, but the Schmutz-Dyke scraping in the slow sand filter. For the operation of these filters, we require more skilled labor in rapid sand filter and less skilled labor in the slow sand filter. The removal of the color is quite good in rapid sand filter, but only fair in the slow sand filter. The removal of bacteria is 98 to 99% in the rapid sand filter, whereas it is 99.9 to 99.99% in the slow sand filter. Let's move on to the next step in the purification. And that is step 3, disinfection. Now, we require certain criteria for a disinfectant to be good, and this would be that, number 1, it should be capable of destroying the pathogenic organisms that are actually present in the water, right? And this would be determined by the temperature, pH, mineral constituents of the water, and we don't want it to change its capability to destroy the water because of this. Next, it should not leave any toxic products within the water, but it should leave some residual concentration of its own disinfectant so it can deal with small possible recontamination in the future. It should be easily available, and finally, it should be amenable to detection. We should be able to detect its concentrations in the lab by simple analytical techniques. When it comes to disinfection, just think chlorination. Reason being that chlorination is one of the greatest advances in water purification. It's going to supplement and not substitute sand filtration. Chlorine is going to kill the pathogenic bacteria. However, it does not have effect on spores and certain viruses except in high doses. Its properties are that it primarily has germicidal activity, and secondarily, it oxidizes some metals, it destroys some bad taste, odor producing chemicals, it controls algae, and it aids in coagulation. The action of chlorine is by the fact that when chlorine gas is added to water, it forms hydrochloric acid and hypochlorous acid. The hydrochloric acid is going to be neutralized because it reacts with the bases that are already present in the water. But the hypochlorous acid is going to break down into your proton as well as your hypochlorite ion. The main disinfecting action of chlorine is due to the hypochlorous acid and a little bit due to the hypochlorite ion. But the main chunk of it is due to hypochlorous acid, which contributes about 70 to 80 times more than the hypochlorite ion. Here's a diagram showing you how chlorination is actually an adjunct to filtration. You can see that alum is added to the river water. That's the process of coagulation. You have the mixing chamber, the flocculation, the sedimentation, and then you filter the water. At this point, we end the filtration process and we store the water. But before we can consume it, we do need to disinfect it with some chlorine. There are certain principles of chlorination because you can't just add chlorine gas to water and call it chlorination. There are certain rules that need to be obeyed or followed in order to ensure proper chlorination, and there are 5 in number. First of all, we need to make sure that the water that is going to be chlorinated is clear and free of turbidity. Secondly, The chlorine demand of water needs to be estimated. This is the difference between the amount of chlorine that is added to the water and the amount remaining at the end of a specified period of contact at a given temperature and pH. Or in simpler terms, it's the amount of chlorine that is needed to destroy the bacteria and to oxidize the organic matter. Now, the point at which the chlorine demand of the water is met is known as the break point. What would happen if you were to add more chlorine beyond this point? What would happen is that you would have residual chlorine being added, and this would be free chlorine in the form of hypochlorous acid. Next is the contact period. There should be a presence of free chlorine, which is about 0.5 milligrams per liter for 1 hour in order to kill the bacteria and viruses. Fourthly, we need the concentration of chlorine to be just right. The minimum recommended dose of free chlorine is again 0.5 milligrams per liter. And finally, the corrected dose of chlorine is actually the chlorine demand plus the free residual chlorine, because not only do we have to overcome the chlorine demand of the water, we also want to have some residual chlorine that can later on deal with recontamination. There are three methods of chlorination. For disinfecting large bodies of water, the chlorine can be applied either as a chlorine gas, chloramine, which is an ammonium compound, or perchloron, which is a calcium compound of chlorine. Chlorine gas is the best option that we have. Chloramine and perchloron are less effective. Now, there is such a thing known as superchlorination, which is where we add large doses of chlorine to the water and then remove excess chlorine after disinfection. This method is applicable to heavily polluted waters whose quality fluctuates greatly. And there is such a thing as controlled superchlorination that we're going to talk about next. This is known as the breakpoint chlorination, also known as the controlled superchlorination. I'm going to explain this using the diagram. When the curve begins, we can see that the chlorine actually increases as we go on increasing the chlorine dosage. This is because the chlorine addition to the water produces chloramines. However, they're not as efficacious as chlorine. So we reach a peak, and then after that peak, as we go on increasing the chlorine dose, that new chlorine is going to break down the old chloramine that was already in the water. And it just goes on decreasing the residual chlorine amount until we reach a point that's known as the break point. The chlorine dosage at this point is known as the breakpoint dosage. Beyond this point, if we add in more chlorine, it's going to increase respectively to the residual chlorine. It's going to, increase in proportion on both ends. Now, in order to be a good disinfectant, we should be able to measure the concentration of chlorine, and we do this by two methods. The orthotolidine test is whereby we use 0.1 ml of the reagent, that is orthotolidine and hydrochloric acid, in 1 ml of the water that we're going to be testing. The yellow color that is produced is matched against suitable standards or color discs. You can see that on the right. We can measure the free chlorine in 10 seconds and free plus combined chlorine fibers. What I mean by this is that the orthotolidine, the reagent, is going to react quicker with the free chlorine, so we can see the results quicker for that, but it reacts more slowly when it comes to combined chlorine. So if you want to see free plus combined chlorine concentration, it's going to take us 5 minutes. The second test is orthotolidine arsenite test. This is a modification of the first test to determine the free and combined chlorine residuals separately. Also in this, the errors that we had in the first test are overcome. Now, we do use chlorine as a disinfectant, but that's not the only one. Especially in recent times, we've noticed that adding chlorine into water leads to the formation of halogenated compounds, some of which are either known or suspected carcinogens. So we've had to come up with new alternatives. These include bromine, bromine chloride, iodine, and chlorine dioxide. However, the most promising alternative we have is ozone, as well as ultraviolet irradiation. So let's go on to talk about ozonation. Ozone is formed by passing dry air or oxygen through a high voltage electric field. The resultant ozone-enriched air is dosed directly into water by means of porous diffusers at the base of baffled contractor tanks. Baffled contractor tanks are shown below. Baffle is just a porous wall, and you don't have to know the detail, you just have to know that ozone is another process of disinfection. And finally, we have the membrane processes. This is very important when it comes to purifying water for drinking purposes. There are two types of processes divided on the basis of pressure. There's low pressure processes and higher pressure processes. If you look at the diagram on the right, you can see raw water coming in. It goes through the process of microfiltration, ultrafiltration, nanofiltration, and reverse osmosis. And as you move from left to right, the size of the pores that are present in each filter actually decrease, whereas the amount of pressure that is calculated in bars is going to increase. And this allows different particles to be filtered at different steps. And you can see that clearly in the diagram that is on the left-hand side. And it can show you how different substances are going to be, filtered. And that concludes today's presentation. Thank you so much for listening. In summary, we went over the storage, filtration, and disinfection of water, and finally we finished off with the membrane processes. Hope you all found this useful. Thank you.